acknowledging owners of country throughout Australia and other lands, and recognise their connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I'd like to welcome my dear Dharma sister and fellow Siddhartha's Intent instructor, Jangchub, to join us for this first part of the session. Hi, Jangchub.
Hi, Tsering. Thank you very much.
I'd like Jangchub and I met Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche in 1984 during Rinpoche's first visit to Australia, which was also Rinpoche's first time teaching in the West. For the next 25 years, we worked together, establishing and facilitating Rinpoche's Australian Retreat Centre, Vajradhara Gompa. The past 15 years, Jangchub has been the pastoral care person for Siddhartha's Intent Australia, assisting Sangha members and others through the last stages of life with compassionate care and skill. Our topic today is living as dying. It reminds me of a much quoted saying where a student asks their teacher, "How should I live my life?" And the teacher replies, "Prepare for death." The student then asks the teacher, "How do I prepare for death?" And the teacher replies, "Live your life." There's a similar quote here in the book from Kasei, "Since I was born, I have to die, and so." Then Rinpoche asks, will nothing help at the moment of death? Everything we humans do, think and feel while we are alive is driven by ignorance, emotion and karma that conspire to ensure that we all have to face both birth and death entirely alone. We have no choice. Once we have been born, nothing and no one can prevent us from dying. The inevitability of death is initiated at birth, and we are powerless to resist it. I would now like to ask Jangchub, from her experience as the pastoral care person, to comment on Rinpoche's question, will nothing help at the moment of death?
Thank you, Tsering. Yes, something will help. Fortunately, we have the blessings of having the Dharma in our lives, and this particular teaching that we're receiving from this book is pretty much the way that we can help for the moment of death. It's preparing for death, getting familiar with impermanence and death of ourselves. We are not going to get away with thinking that we won't die. We have this tendency to think that when we hear about the death of people and so forth, it's still something separate from us. And yet we sort of don't take it deeply that it's actually, mirroring something that's going to happen to us, that we will die. But at the same time, it's not something that should necessarily frighten us or make us feel like we can't handle that. Throughout this book, we're going to explore all the different avenues of preparing ourselves, all the things that Khyentse Rinpoche has advised, and also the wonderful people who'll be coming in and talking and giving their advice and experience. So we have a wealth of knowledge, and we have a lineage of wisdom masters who've passed this lineage to us through this incredible book. And I'm so happy to be able to be a part of it. And my own personal experience is still probably quite limited to what some of the people who will be coming on. I have been able to be honoured by being present at a few people's passing away, a few close friends, some Dharma students, and also some lay people that weren't particularly Buddhist, but at the last point in their journey, suddenly became interested in reading, I think it was Sogyal Rinpoche's book, Living and Dying, and were very inspired by it. And therefore, somehow, someone found out that I was sort of working in this area. And I met up with these people, and we just talked about dying in a really kind of natural way that, okay, maybe you haven't been a Dharma practitioner for a really long time and your death is coming soon. Is there still something that I can do right now? And my advice for them was to meditate, to try and bring the mind home, to try and sit with themselves during the times that are sometimes uncomfortable, and whatever arises, not to judge it, not to think I can't, handle this situation. I'll be overwhelmed by anxiety. You may feel the anxiety, but the one thing they say about anxiety is that it doesn't actually kill you. It's just this thing that you have to welcome and not fight against, because at the moment of death, if you're not prepared, that level of anxiety can be heightened just through the fear, just through that element of fear, not knowing what's coming next. So preparation is a big deal. Like when we go on a trip somewhere, we make a preparation to, put our things in order, book our ticket, find out about the place where we're going, what kind of language they speak. Do we need to find out what kind of food we should take? And that's just on the process of getting there. Then we also have, when we're about to take a journey, we also have to think about what we're leaving behind. Is someone there to take care of the cat? Is someone there to look after our plants, our pot plants, our everyday situations? Will someone look after that our home is safe for us? Things like that. So we have this preparation for going forward, but we also have a kind of knowledge of preparation of something that we're leaving behind. I think one of the big path of this is getting familiar with the practice, getting familiar with these teachings that you're about to receive. I just wanted to say something because I know maybe there are some people here that haven't really thought about death much, or it's a new thing for them. Please don't think that, we're giving advice and guidance, and just take what really works for you, something that, clicks for you, that makes you want to maybe look into it a little bit more deeper. It's about bringing some kind of gentleness and tenderness into the process of dying. It's not to make you feel uncomfortable. I mean, our society is so divorced from the process of dying. I mean, people who are in their 90s still think they have this long period to live and prepare. We don't know when the time of death will ripen. So I urge you to, take this to heart, and also to bring it into your life. Like, start making aspirations for the time of your death. Make aspirations that you will have the right circumstances, that the right situation will come about, the right people will be there or not be there, that the care will be provided, and also like preparing your friends when this is kind of part of that preparation thing, preparing your friends so that they know what they could do for you, and maybe things that you don't want done. Like, you might be someone who doesn't want a lot of people around. That's your basic nature, but you'd like people to pray for you. That's something that you can do for the time of death, that you can do now, that you can put into place, connecting with people and, talking about death, just as friends would, discuss anything else. So I think, again, I'm going back to the preparation and the fact that we have the most amazing guides, our wisdom masters, and that for the next few months we're going to get a lot of incredible people to guide us. So please, just if one particular session of this doesn't resonate with you, know that all your questions will be answered as we go along, and we will have question and answer time as well. So some things that we can do to practice as a Buddhist for the preparation of death is the aspiration prayers, which is most important. And for a Buddhist practitioner, taking refuge. Taking refuge is the key point, is like, at the time of death, there is no other refuge to take than to merge one's mind with the Guru's mind, or to become awakened to the Buddha nature, or to make that aspiration to be awakened for the benefit of all sentient beings. We have a really big view. It's not just for ourselves, it's for all sentient beings. So even though we're not thinking like that at the time of death, we can just have these aspirations that we can carry with us. And taking refuge is really important, because it's something that we can do throughout our day to prepare ourselves, because, as I said, we don't know when we're going to die. If during the day we can remember our Lama, our Buddha, our refuge, whether it's a Buddhist refuge or perhaps you're a Shivite, whatever your practice is, to bring that refuge into your being, to remember it several times during the day, so that if something happened unexpectedly, that's in your continuum in your daily life. Otherwise, it becomes something that, it's to bring about that mindfulness. So I hope that's helpful. And there's also, like, for us practitioners, as Dhamma practitioners, there's stages of death to become familiar with. All those things we'll, discuss later on in the book, and in more detail. But again, getting familiar with our own mind and our compassion and a sense of support that we can gather from our friends, what we'd like done, and prepare like your, prepare your wills, prepare your, health, living wills, I think. It's okay to do that even when you're young, because you have no guarantees. No one knows. So to have these things in place, it helps you while you're dying, because you have no more concerns about those sort of things. And also it helps the people around you. And we will be going through this in the book as well. So there'll be a lot of different advice that you'll receive. But just exploring a little bit of those things yourself would be a good thing to do. And taking refuge here sounds like, the voice of guidance, taking refuge in the words of the Buddha, taking refuge in the intention of the Buddha, and knowing that we have the possibility to, through our practice, to be released into this Buddha nature, into this higher, unconfused state of mind where we're not swayed by our anger and our desires and attachment. It's all about letting go of our clinging and fixation. So the only time to do this is right now. So as many times we can take refuge, as many times as we can think of impermanence and our Lama, I think that will look after us. And for those, again, who aren't necessarily Buddhist practitioners, you will gain a lot through this book of, things that you can just put into place for the refuge that you have. Because, the main thing is that we die peacefully, that we don't die in a distressed state, and we die in an awakened state. And whether you have refuge in Jesus or Shiva or whatever that is, it's going to create at least a good rebirth, And if you have the aspiration to help benefit sentient beings on top of that, that's already an amazing thing. And I think, too, one of the things I want to say is that we're doing our best. There's no perfect practice. It's really the best we can do. So please don't think, I'm not a good enough practitioner, I can't keep my concentration. These aspirations will help with that a lot. So thank you for listening to me. And Sering, is there anything else that you would like to ask or talk about?
I think that's fine, Jangchub. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was really beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So before we hand over to Jakob to lead us through the rest of the session, let's pause just for a few moments and consider that question: will nothing help at the moment of death? And now we'll hand over to Jakob to explore this question even further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sering. And thank you very much, Jangchub. Just contemplating this question, will something help at the time of death? makes me think of Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, who, speaking very much to practitioners that very often live with the commitment to practice and yet also a very humbling awareness about our, also like Jangchub was alluding to, our imperfect practice. And exactly actually confirms what Jangchub was saying, in the sense that he says, you might go through an entire life of wishing to integrate your practice and failing again and again, but never giving up. He says, you will die as a lion. If there is this commitment to unveiling the abiding condition of reality as it exists within ourselves, as we're, you could say, integrating through the practice of the Dharma. If we're committed to that, and in any way, also like Jangchub was saying, it doesn't really matter if we're Buddhist, if we're on some path, then being continually attentive to this and recognizing humbly that we might fail, then nevertheless, this is where we die in a far more dignified way than if we had sort of stuck with just some fixed idea and in a way sort of just, you could say, resigned to some sort of just numbness with regards to the process. I don't want to know. And this is quite prevalent also in the modern era, where there is this, you could say, ignorance around the nature of death, that we just might say, well, I don't want to know, I don't want to think about it, I'll just make the most of it. That's where we very well could have a condition of really strong fear at the time of death. But if this is a perseverance, this is so valuable. Now, I'm going to be going through just the text itself. So let me just set that up. Yeah. So today I'm going to be, well, I should let you all know, I'm just doing what I'm told, and I'm very, very grateful to Tsering, who has organized this. And so Tsering thought it would be a good idea to go over the next few pages, and then at the end, in the conjunction with our discussion about Buddha nature, then have a video with Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche. So we'll do that before then a question and answer session. Now, last time we spoke about this situation of us, how we should handle death. And I would say there's something before we begin this, just like to say, there's something the great masters always really emphasize, is that when you die, do so with a relaxed state of mind, as much as you can. So this is where, of course, there's an incredible amount of advice that we're going to be offering here, essentially coming from Rinpoche and from the great masters of the lineage. Now, they're all to be applied as much as we can now. But once we arrive at the time of death, that's where actually we would, you could say, reap the fruit or settle into acknowledging that we have worked at this. We've done as well as we can. It's a little about if we're going to perform something or do something, we can prepare up to a certain point, but then we need to go out there. And at that point, it's important that regardless of where we're coming from, then to settle into a sense of it's all right, I accept what's coming. And that calm of mind will be very helpful then on our further journey. And particularly, I'm thinking of Nyala Pema Dundul, a great master of the 19th century Tibet. And his advice was, at the time of death, ponder what you've done. This, of course, was instruction to practitioners. But at that point, ponder what you've done. Go over the various practices you've done in your life. Be appreciative. Rejoice in your practice throughout the life that you've had. And at that point, then, you have some confidence, some joy in moving on. Now, last time we talked about then some very important points around this, you could say, application of such a point. And that is to be able to let go of our thoughts. And that is not easy. So that's where we want to prepare. Now, speaking from the point of view of us now preparing, and we were just talking about this with some friends, you know, right now is the moment where we can be proactive. It's important that we don't think that life and death is something that's just happening to us, that we don't have any say in this. We are entirely positioned to be proactive. We are empowered to create the circumstances that we wish to have right now. So, you know, as far as sometimes people, they sort of speculate a little bit about past and future lives, and they'll say, oh, I wonder what I was in my future life. I wonder what I'll be in my next life. And there's a very pragmatic saying around that, which is, if you want to know what you were in your future, what you did in your future, in your past life, look at your present situation. If you want to know what you will be like in the future, look at your present actions. So our actions right now determine what will come. And that's where we are here, having this work from Tsongsa Gyalme Khyentse Rinpoche and advices from many great masters. We are in a position to be proactive in terms of what will come. But then Rinpoche here, he makes this point. He says, if you don't want to experience the helplessness and loneliness of death and rebirth, you must gather the causes and conditions for never being reborn again while you are still alive. Now, this is very much, you could say, taking it to the top. This is the ultimate objective of the entire Buddhist path. So here we're basically saying, if you don't want to wander in samsara, then attain enlightenment. So that's where the Buddhist path is very relevant. This is, you could say, goes beyond just us having a, you could say, a nice thought. But this is very much in the spirit of being proactive presently with our present conditions to actually get to the bottom of what essentially is what is the foundation for our loneliness, helplessness, fear, and suffering in general, which is a fundamental delusion. And like we were just reading above, I think Tsering read the section above, where it says that it's our ignorance, emotion, and karma that conspire to ensure that we all have to face birth and death entirely alone. And this is exactly the condition that Rinpoche then says, if we want to get over that, then we need to gather the causes and conditions. And that is then the causes and conditions for never being reborn. This is then to eliminate a fundamental delusion that consists of our basic unawareness, our unconsciousness. And out of that, what arises are then the karma and kleshas. The kleshas being the, you could say, strategies of our unconsciousness, our unawareness, in which we just essentially stumble about unconsciously on the basis of our likes and dislikes, aversion, attachment, and essentially the whole realm of all the sort of toxic conditions of the mind. And then acting on these, we lay down karmic patterns, which is then what drives us through situation after situation, birth after birth. So for us to get to the bottom of this, if we really want to get to the bottom of this, then to end this condition, we need to be proactive in the present life. And again, this is where we have a path, but this needs to be practiced now. So this state of never being reborn again, this is what we refer to as the state of deathlessness. And this is then where Milarepa famously said, out of fear of death, I ran to the mountains where I have then captured the citadel of deathlessness. So this is where, for us to actually get to the bottom of never being reborn again, there's no way around that we need to look at the likes of Milarepa and follow his example. So Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche says, and this is then where we might think, well, I couldn't do this, and we might sort of fall back into a more habitual way of seeing things. And that's where he says, and this is being very blunt and very honest, he says, at the moment of death, you may find yourself surrounded by relatives and friends, but it is extremely unlikely that they will be of any use to you. They may even make things worse. What if, as you breathe your last, you realize that, like vultures, your greedy relatives are already fighting over who gets what? That before your corpse is cold, they will be stripping your beautiful home of all its treasures, hacking into your email accounts and breaking open your safety deposit boxes. As they stand at your deathbed, they may be squabbling over who gets your priceless Louis XV desk, and your worthless nephew may be leafing through one of your precious first editions. Conversely, having those you love and who love at your bedside as you pass away could make the pain of separation unbearable. So this is where we should be grateful to Rinpoche for actually taking it a little bit away from what we often have, is a rather unjustified romanticizing around death, where we think, well, there will be, hopefully it'll be like this and like that, and, and we don't really want to think the thought through. And that's where Rinpoche sort of injects a little bit, you could say, a very blunt perspective that we should consider that it might not at all be easy. We might be, you could say, we might be surrounded by difficult circumstances, such as the surprisingly common practice that once somebody dies, everybody is like greedy for the inheritance. This is, of course, incredibly sad. And I would say, even if we're not the one dying, if we're around people who are dying, nothing is more, you could say, detrimental for their further journey. If we begin to sort of long for some of their possessions, whether it's money or, yes, their Louis XV desk or whatever it might be, first editions, whatever. If we're sort of there drooling over wanting money or wanting this, wanting that, this will make it very difficult for the further journey. That said, it's so common in our culture that this happens, that if we see it happen around us, then at least what we could do is not be angry at these people who are doing that. But it's really important that there is an atmosphere of peace and serenity. So that's also where, again, we might want to be surrounded by people we love. But then again, if you read the instructions on dying, they very often say something also very blunt. They say, make sure nobody's around you there is crying. And that, of course, we say, well, that's impossible. How could we not cry when somebody's dying? But the point is really that it makes it difficult. Now, of course, what we're talking about here is what would be ideal. And so if this isn't possible, then, of course, we shouldn't resent that people are crying. But it's not as if having those that we love near us is going to make it any easier. So again, this is where Rinpoche is sort of interjecting some pretty realistic considerations. And like Jangchub was saying before, this is all about preparation. And so much of what we're doing here is really just taking a sober look at what are the necessary aspects. So the main thing, and this is of course what Rinpoche was just talking, if we want to be able to get through this, then it's so important that we practice the path. If we really want to get to the bottom of it, well, then we need to follow the path that the sages of the past have outlined. It says here, the gross human mind tends to think of death as the final separation of body from mind. A more precise description is that death marks the end of a period of time. Throughout so-called life, we're therefore experiencing a continuous stream of deaths. So we understand these are relative to each other. And Rinpoche then says the death of death is birth. So once death is finished, just like we're saying living is dying, well, then dying is living. What comes next after death is birth. The death of birth is abiding. So that's where once we're born, then for a period of time, then we abide. We have this condition of this present life, the natural bardo of this life. And then we say the death of abiding is the birth of death. So as this abiding comes to an end, then we enter into the condition of dying. So Rinpoche says everything you experience is simultaneously a death and birth. And if you're subject to the phenomenon called time, you will also be subject to death. Again, here Rinpoche is proposing, and that's where we we are not being spared of the possibility of perfect enlightenment. If we are able to get over what we call time, which is the very foundation of samsara, which is the very stuff of what we call dualistic phenomena, if we are subject to the nature of ignorance and the constructions of ignorance, the whole, you could say, experience of duality, if we could get over that, then we would be free. But everything we experience right now is something that is called time. And that means we're subject to death. So Rinpoche says, what is generally known as life or dying is full of incidents, but death, which is perhaps the most significant of all life's events, is quite the opposite. If you were to die tonight, you would lose your identity and all your possessions, and not one of your plans would materialize. This is why death is such a big issue. For most of us, birth is far less of a worry, and certainly nowhere near as frightening as death. In fact, we love births. Once a baby has been born, we congratulate the parents, then relentlessly commemorate its birthday for the rest of its life. An entire industry is now dedicated to servicing birthdays, birthday cakes, birthday parties, birthday surprises, and of course, birthday cards are all available at the click of a button. Without having to lift a finger, social media makes it impossible for any of us to forget a single birthday, not even the cats. So we can identify the folly that's basic to this ignorance. At the same time, Rinpoche is not suggesting that we should stop congratulating people on their birthdays. We're not suggesting that you should cancel the birthday parties, but just being aware that we have a little bit of a paradox in, you could say, this very unaware culture. And that's where the Rinpoche goes on to say, unlike us, and by the way, Rinpoche is not above this. This is also one of the beauties of Rinpoche's way of teaching, is he'll say, like us, one of us here, says, unlike us, and then referring then to those that have the wisdom. He says, the great Mahayana masters thought of birth as a much greater hurdle to overcome than death. Nagarjuna, the great Indian scholar and Mahasiddha, told his friend, the king, that for a spiritual person, birth is far more disturbing and a much bigger issue than death could ever be. So why do spiritual people value death over birth? Birth is the one event in this life over which we have absolutely no control. We pop out of our mother's bodies without having been asked a single question. We have no say about where we're born, who our parents are, the day and hour of our birth, or even if we should be born in the first place. Every aspect is out of our hands. So this is how it mostly, you could say, plays out. Of course, we'd say there are those who have control over where they choose to be reborn, the time, and so on. This is what we refer to as the bodhisattvas, the tukus, nirmanakayas. But most of us, we have no say in this. So that's where birth, that's really something that is a little bit worrying, because we actually don't have any control. So Rinpoche says the knowledge that we have been born is of no help whatsoever at any stage in our life, whereas the knowledge that death is inevitable continually urges us to appreciate what we have right now. Knowing that we must die helps us to make the most of life. Knowing that death is imminent and certain is what makes it possible for us to love and to remain sane. It also prevents us from becoming desensitized and numbed by worldly life. For most of us, life is intoxicating. Thinking about death is perhaps the only method available that can truly sober us up. So when there is a vision of what actually we can do in terms of our, you could say, future, what happens to us beyond this life, then there's every reason to appreciate death as something that actually reminds us to make the right choices. So that's where you could, Rinpoche says, knowing that we must die helps us to make the most of life. So we very often have this sense of, very often the construction of death in our culture is like, it happens to you and you wouldn't want it to happen. But actually, this is again where we shouldn't just let it be something that happens to us, but where we're actually preparing ourselves. It's like when leaving home. As teenagers, we might not be thinking a whole lot about it. Maybe our parents do a lot more. But there's actually a sense that you're going to leave home and you better be prepared. You better have certain things in place, a good education, a place to go, and some sort of a game plan of some sort. So that's similarly also with regards to death. It's not just that we're regretting that we're leaving home, but there's actually a place where we think, okay, this is going to be interesting. And so with the sage then and the practitioner, this is where we sober up and actually do what needs to be done. So Rinpoche says, if you have been born, you will have to die. And if you're about to die, you will have to be reborn. How do we cut this cyclic game of birth and death? By realizing a state of awakening. Once you have been awakened or become enlightened, you will no longer gather the causes and conditions that result in death and rebirth. But until then, you will be reborn and you will die over and over and over again. As birth and death are inseparable, we should mourn birth just as much as we mourn death, especially these days. Just think for 1 second about what your children will have to go through as adults. So just to sort of ponder again, what Rinpoche here is suggesting is realizing the state of awakening. And that's where we need to understand this takes a bit more than just, you could say, during the psychedelic era. There was Tim Leary that got hold of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and there was sort of a hippie attitude that emerged in that, where you just have to go into the light. And very often you could say New Age jargon, there's the notion of just go into the light, just meet the light. And even I attended a workshop some years ago where it was preparation for death, and it sort of culminated in, at the end, just go into the light. And that was kind of the takeaway, just go into the clear light. And let's just be quite honest about that. To just go into the clear light requires an enormous amount of preparation. People like Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, Tugu Urgyen, great masters, they can go into the clear light because they've trained in the clear light. They've familiarized and lived in the clear light their entire life. So at the time of death, yes, then one can go into the clear light. But that means presently that we familiarize ourselves with that. And that is, of course, the true nature of what we are. This is the true nature that's not contaminated by confusion. And that's where we, in the Buddhist teaching, you could say the beautiful thing of the Buddhist teaching is this acknowledgement that fundamentally we have this clarity, we have this uncontaminated basic goodness that is the clear light. But we need to familiarize ourselves with that. And until then we might very well just be deceived by our habitual projections. And that's where Rinpoche says, just think for a second about what your daughter will have to go through as adults. Your children will have to go through as adults. One day, your daughter will walk into a department store and become mesmerized by all manner of tantalizing phenomena. Just the glossy red lipsticks alone will be utterly thrilling, not to mention the stationery. This is actually a little bit of an inside joke, since we all know Rinpoche has a particular fetish for stationery. So Rinpoche is making a little bit of a joke of himself. Anyway, it says, after that, there will be no avoiding the world of gourmet coffee and Starbucks or fashion and wellness resorts and bank balances and the concept of money. Wow, her life will be tough. And that is what the sages would look at us sentient beings and just look at how muddled we are in terms of our priorities. So is there an upside to death? Well, most certainly, and that's the whole point here. We can do something about this situation. Rinpoche says, facing death helps us appreciate what it is to be alive, but hardly anyone thinks like this these days. Most modern people live blindly, completely ignoring the inevitability and unpredictability of death. So, Buddha nature. According to Buddha Dharma, death teaches us one extremely positive truth, that the nature of each and every sentient being's mind is the Buddha, that the nature of my mind and the nature of your mind is the Buddha. Buddha nature isn't some exotic New Age theory or occult phenomena. Because you have Buddha nature, whatever you do, whatever you are, the essence of your mind is Buddha. So we can recognize that there's a ground in us that is not contaminated. It's on the basis of that that we actually are not happy to suffer. It's on the basis of that that we know people we love essentially have a goodness. We see it in them. We recognize it in our children. We recognize in the people that we're actually open to. And we actually intuit something good within ourselves. It's that which enables us to recognize sanity and the qualities that we strive for in great teachers, like the Dalai Lama, like Khyentse Rinpoche himself, like His Holiness Sakya Trinzen. Perhaps, like Jangchub was saying, if you're a Shaivite, you might recognize this in some of the great Shaivite gurus. Or as a Christian, you might recognize this in some of the great Christian saints. So there's a recognition of this goodness that's innate to our understanding and you could say our experience of our reality. So Rinpoche says, feel the texture of the book or device you are holding. Listen to what is going on around you. Feel the softness of the cushion under your buttocks or the weight of your body on the soles of your feet. Think about the words you're reading. The essence of your mind is the Buddha. The way that we come to this is not through imagining or philosophizing, but beginning to actually be sensitive to just being present. Yesterday, Rinpoche was teaching meditation, and he made such a point of how we ground ourselves through first being aware of the environment, being aware of our body. Similarly here, being aware of our existence, being aware of our perceptions. This we'd want to do just having some sense of where we are, feeling our existence right here. We could do this just for a moment. Rinpoche says, the mind that does everything I have just mentioned, your own very ordinary mind, is the Buddha. Not only is your mind the Buddha, the ordinary mind of every sentient being that is aware, reads, sees, hears, tastes, and so on, is also the Buddha. Nice words, but we actually connect with this through experience. And that's where it's so important, this practice of just sitting and not doing anything, just sensing our mind, sensing this ordinary condition that is the Buddha. Rinpoche says, think of a glass of muddy water. Even though the water itself is pure and clear, when stirred, it mixes with the mud, and what we see is muddy water. In the same way, our basic lack of mindfulness and awareness stirs up all manner of thoughts and emotion that then mingle with and muddy our pure, clear mind. So there's no rocket science in the practice of just sitting, but it does require that we actually do it, feel it, and experience it. That is where then mindfulness becomes part of who we are. So we'd like to just now, we'd just like to actually show you a video with Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche teaching on Buddha nature. see here.
If you ask me, prove me that there is a Buddha nature. How come? Day by day, all I feel is negative. I'm filled with emotions, negative emotions. How do I know that there is a Buddha nature, right? Minute by minute, moment by moment, I'm, filled with all this dirt. How do I know there's a Buddha nature? The Mahayana's answer is, because you are dirt, the defilements are all temporary and purifiable, removable. This is one of the main logic. And that you should accept. For instance, when you get angry, how long do you get angry? 1 week, 1 month, 2 months, 1 year. Your emotions come and go. It's all temporary. And this is a good proof. Like another example is like the cloud covering the sun. Cloud goes, and you think the sun arises, but it's not true. Sun is always there. Talked about the Buddha nature a little bit, so we will just for the practical thing we can do. Now, this is important. With the motivation, with the intention of, first you need to have the intention of experiencing, tapping, getting acquainted, recognizing this basic goodness of human being or Buddha nature or Tathagata Garbha, whatever you want to call it. Okay, that should be the motivation. That's important. Not for good life, not for good car, not for success, not for, Remember hay and the rice? You look for rice, not for hay. That is important. Okay? With this motivation, we will apply few discipline, very simple, such as sitting straight. So please sit straight. And as you sit straight, just watch your thoughts. And as the thought arises, do not judge. If the thoughts are not good thoughts, don't condemn. Just watch. If it is good thoughts, don't get excited. Just register. And as you are aware of one thought, there will be the next thought coming. Just watch that next thought. You don't have to finish with the first thought. And maybe you don't even have thoughts. If you don't have thoughts, just be aware of that. And don't look for something special. Because we are calling it a Buddha nature, maybe you are looking for a special sensation or a special realization or some kind of a light or experience. mundane is very beautiful. Mundane is sacred. If you are thinking about car honking, then just be aware of that. If you realize you have been following a thought, then come back to just knowing the thought. Okay, now please think, this attempt to face the Buddha nature, Tathagata Garva, basic goodness of human being, may the merit of this enlighten all sentient beings.
Continue on.
Not hearing you, Jakob.
Just press the mute.
I think you can hear me now, right? So,
Thank you.
anyway, this was extremely profound instruction. I think everyone realizes that. And I actually hadn't seen this myself before, so I'm very, very grateful for Tsering to have chosen this. So helpful. So I think probably also what we'll do is upload this video to the resource folder. Would just like to finish off just now with, if anyone has any questions, please either, I would say put them in the chat. That's probably all right. And just before we finish, if you have any questions, please go ahead. In general, when we're doing these programs, please feel free at any time to write in your questions. You know, we can always. It doesn't disturb us if you type in a question during the discussion, the reading, and then we can answer them at the end.
I don't know.
All right. If there are no more questions, then I'd just like to thank everyone for coming. And next week, we're going to be proceeding then in the reading here with the section called Watch Your Mind. And we're very fortunate. We'll have Ben Islev, who's been teaching mindfulness, been a Buddhist mindfulness teacher for a very long time, I think several decades. Someone who has a very solid grounding within Buddhist education and also who has a PhD in psychology. And so is someone who has for a very long time been had experience in presenting meditation within a context of, well, you could say a secular context, non-Buddhist context, and of course also within a Buddhist context. So Ben Islev will be leading the program next week. Very much looking forward to that. So
One comment has come in, so I'll just read it. It came in to the SI programs, but maybe just to mine. We are scared of death because we are not sure of what is out there. So more a comment, but that was just shared.
yeah, and that's why, this is why when we have that, we shouldn't see that as something that shouldn't be there. It's a justifiable, natural way of actually of feeling about this situation, and that's where we should really take advantage of the situation that right now we actually can be proactive. We can do something about this. We can study the nature of mind. We can study consciousness, and we can understand what it is that takes place when we die. This is not like in the modern world where death is a mystery. Within the Buddhist teaching, we have, you could say Buddhists, they don't have a lot of, you could say, advanced technology, but one thing they have is an understanding of mind, of consciousness, and what happens when we die. So we should take advantage of that presently and essentially prepare ourselves on the basis of that. It's like if we're going to an unknown country, we can study the map. That will help a lot. We're getting to know about the country, preparing ourselves, and having some idea before we enter into the territory. And in a way, we can already enter the territory now, as we practice meditation, as we practice familiarizing ourselves with the nature of our consciousness, with the nature of mind. Okay, I think that's it. So once again, thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you next week. Oh yes, hold on. There's a dedication prayer. Just a sec. You're right there. This virtuous accumulation of merit we offer so that all obstacles dissolve, and that at the time of our death, each of us may find ease in dying and swift rebirth in the pure land of great bliss, quickly gaining enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jakob.
Thanks, Jakob.
Thank you, Jakob.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That was
Thank you.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you, Sering. Thank you, Jangchub.
Thank you, Sering. Thank you, Jangchub. Thank you, Jangchub. Thank you, Jakob.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jangchub. Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Thanks, Jakob.
Thanks, Sering.
Thank you.
Thank you.